I have a great honor and pleasure to present to you Peter Kyle, my dear friend, who is my director colleague from Maryland, from zones 33 and 34. You have seen his CV already because I sent it to you, but he's got quite a career as a peace builder in so many capacities. And I'm happy to welcome you, Peter, to speak to us about Rotarian peace, so important in this world. I will stop sharing this right now, and the floor is yours, Peter.
Great. Well, thank you, Verpi, for that nice introduction. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see lots of people on the screen. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk about Rotary's role as a peace-building organization, because I think Rotary and peace just go together. As I hope I will convince you in a few minutes, peace is in our DNA. So let me describe the context which has led Rotary to become a peace-building organization. As you know, we started in 1905 in Chicago, started fairly slowly. By 1910, there were only 16 Rotary clubs around the world. The focus was on service, but at that time, the forces of nationalism were beginning to arise in Europe. And as you will recall, in 1914, Germany and England declared war on each other. It was a terrible war, a lot of destruction, a lot of deaths, a lot of injuries. So when the war finished in 1918, the focus of Rotary clubs became very much, how can we prevent a war like that from ever happening again? There's a strong focus on reconstruction in Europe, and the North American clubs equally concerned about ensuring that Rotary become more focused on peace. In 1921, at the International Convention in Edinburgh, Rotarians passed a resolution calling for Rotarians to promote international understanding, goodwill, and peace. And those words, international understanding, goodwill, and peace, have since become enshrined in the object of Rotary, and they are, of course, the foundation for the activities of the Rotary Foundation. Rotary clubs continued to grow quite rapidly in the 20s and 30s. In 1939, we chartered club number 5,000. At that time, we had around 150,000 Rotarians all around the world. Rotary was an enormous organization. It was a mini United Nations. At that time, Rotary was extremely influential. The classification criteria were applied quite strictly. You had to be a male, and of course, we've since addressed that situation. And you had to be a partner or a manager or a school principal or a superintendent of police or someone relatively senior in your vocation or your profession. So when Rotarians came together at a district conference, it was truly a meeting of community movers and shakers. And when Rotarians met at an international convention, this was a world event, very, very influential. In 1940, Rotarians met in Havana, Cuba, of all places. And I might just say that at that time in Cuba, there were 58 Rotary clubs. Currently, there are none, although we hope that that will change before too long. And at that convention, Rotarians passed a resolution calling for, amongst other things, respect for human rights. That was the first time those words, respect for human rights, had entered into the international vocabulary. and that became the basis for the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, signed in 1948. At that time, there was no such thing as a non-governmental organization. Now there are thousands of NGOs around the world. But prior to the Second World War, there were no such things as NGOs. Rotary was in effect the first non-governmental organization. In 1942, a number of senior Rotarians met in London. They were concerned about the impact of the war on education, on scientific research, on cultural traditions and monuments. And that led to a resolution which later became the basis for UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. In 1944, Prime Minister Churchill and President Truman decided that the time had come to establish an organization which would prohibit war for all time. Rotary was one of a very small number of organizations who were invited to send lawyers and other experts to work alongside officials from China, the former Soviet Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And when the United Nations Charter was signed in San Francisco in June of 1945, 49 out of the 800 delegates were Rotarians. The following year, the United Nations decided to establish an internship program. The idea was to bring young people from all around the world to New York to observe the workings of this new entity. Great idea, but there was no money. What did the United Nations do? They approached Rotary, and Rotary agreed to fund the first United Nations internship program in 1946. Rotary continued to expand dramatically in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but the relationship with the United Nations largely went into abeyance. This was the period of the Cold War, and clubs were more concerned with local issues rather than international issues. But Rotary re-engaged with the United Nations in 1985 when we established the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. We partnered with the World Health Organization and with CDC, and of course with UNICEF, and subsequently with the Gates Foundation and with Gavi and other organizations. In the late 1980s, Rotarians were increasingly reaching out to other UN organs, to UNESCO, to UNICEF, to UNHCR, and other international organizations. So in 1990, the board established the Rotary Representative Network. This is the body that oversees Rotary's relationships with the United Nations and other international organizations. We have appointed 32 Rotarians. We call them representatives. In a way, they are ambassadors. And we have 16 organizations in the network: UNICEF, UNESCO, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the World Health Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization, and other international organizations such as the European Union, the Commonwealth of Nations, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the Organization for American States. And Rotary has appointed representatives in the places, in the cities where those organizations are based. So we have 2 representatives in Rome, 2 in Paris, 2 in Brussels, 2 in London, 3 in Geneva, where the UN European headquarters are based. We have 6 in New York, 4 in Washington, DC, and others spread around the world, in Manila, in Abidjan, in Cairo, in Addis Ababa. And their role initially was to promote awareness of what Rotary is and was doing around the world, particularly in relation to polio. More recently, the responsibility for these individuals has expanded. It's now more of a two-way process. Not only can we contribute to these organizations, but we can benefit from learning how they approach humanitarian and developmental projects. For example, how does UNICEF carry out community assessments? How does UNESCO evaluate projects? We can learn from their experience. They are international, they are much larger than Rotary, and we can partner with these organizations. And increasingly around the world, Rotary is partnering with these organizations. Let me give you an example. 3 years ago, Rotary decided to have a Rotary Day in Nairobi at the African headquarters of the United Nations. The United Nations Environmental Program, which is the environmental arm of the UN, is based in Nairobi. I went down to Kenya as part of the planning team, and while I was there, I asked to meet with representatives of the UN environment. 5 young people came into the room, all young environmental activist-looking people. Unbeknown to us, the team leader of this group was a Rotary Peace Fellow from New Zealand. Doesn't get much better than that. One of the other representatives was a former ambassadorial scholar. A third person was the president of one of the local clubs. And they came prepared with a list of 25 projects which they thought might be of interest to clubs and districts around the world. That led to a meeting between then President Barry Rassin and the Director General of the UN Environment, which led to a meeting between John Hugo, the CEO of Rotary, and senior officials of UN Environment. And that led to a decision to establish a task force to prepare a handbook on how to do environmental projects. This was a joint effort involving UN Environment, the staff in Evanston, and Rotary's Environmental Sustainable Rotary Action Group. And the publication was produced last year, or rather in 2019, in Hamburg at the International Convention. It's a very impressive publication. You can download it from the Rotary website, and it contains all sorts of useful information on how to identify environmental projects, how to do community assessments, how to evaluate environmental projects. So a very tangible outcome of a collaboration between Rotary and a UN organization. And we are in the process of developing other handbooks in the other areas of focus, maternal and child health, literacy, and so on. Another outcome of the Nairobi trip was a decision by UN Environment and the Rotary clubs in Nairobi to enter into a memorandum of understanding, pursuant to which the Rotary clubs in Nairobi are involved in a very big project to clean up various rivers that flow through or nearby Nairobi. Again, working with UN Environment staff and using best practices. Another good example of the collaboration. Of course, one of the main activities of the Rotary Representative Group was to have Rotary Days. For many years, we had a Rotary Day in New York. In fact, the Rotary Day in New York was the third most significant event on the annual Rotary calendar after the annual convention and the International Assembly. Recently, last year, again, I have to get used to saying the year before last, in 2019, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the signing of the UN Charter, and therefore the 75th anniversary of the signing of the relationship between Rotary and the United Nations. And President Mark Maloney decided to have 5 presidential conferences around the world to celebrate this relationship. The first was held in New York in November of 2019. The next 4, one was to be held in Santiago, Chile, one in Paris at UNESCO, one in Rome at FAO, and the final conference was to be held in Honolulu as part of the convention. But as you know, because of COVID-19, they were cancelled, and the riots in Santiago, we had to cancel those 4 conferences, which was a great shame because we had some wonderful speakers lined up. This year, with President Holger Naak, we have 2 Rotary Days. One took place last November in Brussels in connection with polio, and this was an opportunity to celebrate the contributions which the countries to the European Union have made to polio. The second event was to be held at the end of February in Geneva at the World Health Organization headquarters, and the focus was to be on maternal and child health, which is one of our main areas of focus. But because of COVID-19, that has been postponed to later in the year. And there are plans during the next Rotary year to have other Rotary Days at the UN. So the relationship between Rotary and the UN has always been very, very strong. And I think we are moving to a phase where it's likely to get even more strong. There are great opportunities for clubs and districts around the world to partner on projects with UNICEF, with UNESCO, and with other UN agencies, UN Commission on Women. We sent a Rotarian 2 years ago to the environmental conference in Katowice in Poland, COP24, and we'll probably do that again this year. So the role of peace in Rotary has really been very strong. Late last century, in the 1990s, a committee of Rotarians decided to establish the Rotary Peace Center program. The first cohort entered into operation in 2002. So we're now in our 19th year of the Rotary Peace Centers program, and we have over 1,600 graduates all around the world, many of whom are now occupying positions of responsibility in international organizations. There are 9 at the World Bank. I think there are over a dozen in the United Nations. So we're beginning to get a very significant return on our investment. We have 6 schools around the world. You're probably familiar with the one in Uppsala in Sweden. And we have schools in England, in Australia, in Japan, in North America. And we have 2 certificate programs. That's the shorter course, one in Bangkok, Thailand, and one was supposed to start this month in Kampala, Uganda. But that will be a virtual rather than an in-person event. We're excited about the new center in Uganda. Uganda is a very strong Rotary country, and the Ugandans are thrilled that they are hosting a Rotary Peace Center. In addition, we've established a Rotary Peace Action Group, which is very active, particularly in North America and in parts of Europe. There are many peace conferences around the world. Every 3 years, we have a peace symposium. We bring peace fellows together to celebrate the Peace Center program. We have a peace academy. We have peace workshops. Many Rotarians ask, how can I, as an individual Rotarian, how can I contribute to peace? Well, you can now go online to the Rotary Learning Center, and there are various courses that you can do. And once you've passed, you will receive a certificate as a Rotarian peace builder. So I encourage you to consider exploring the Rotary Learning Center. It's a wealth of information, a wealth of programs. So I'm often asked, after polio, what will be the next corporate project? Of course, the official line is that we mustn't talk about future projects. We need to keep our eye on the ball and finish the job with polio, and we will complete the eradication of polio. But if I was a betting man, I think the next corporate project would involve some aspect of peace and education. As I've tried to explain, peace is in our DNA. I don't think we will ever become a maternal and child health organization. The World Health has got that cornered. I don't think we'll become a water and sanitation organization. There are many hundreds of organizations that are far better resourced and equipped to handle the technical aspects of water and sanitation. But in the area of peace, I think it will be possible to carve out a niche for Rotary. I'm involved in developing my own project in zones 33 and 34. It's called Youth Plus Peace in Action, engaging 100,000 young community peace builders. And we're very excited about this. We've raised quite a lot of money, and we'll be rolling out a very significant project throughout the 31 districts in zones 33 and 34, involving dozens of community peace-related events. And that, I think, is a prototype of how Rotary might move forward in the peace and education area. So that's a short background. I hope, Burpee, I haven't spoken too long. I hope you'll get a good sense of the importance of the United Nations and Rotary's history and the role that Rotary is playing with the United Nations in developing projects and collaborations around the world. I think it's exciting. I think there's a lot of potential for future growth. And I'm delighted to play a small role in promoting Rotary's peace-building agenda. So with that, I'll stop. I'm happy, if there's time, to answer any questions. Thank you for this opportunity. And over to you, Verpi.